Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Autumn and today's video will be a reading vlog. In the beginning of this video, I mention certain books I plan on reading, but as the next couple of weeks come and go, I change my mind. I guess that's just the beauty of being a mood reader, but don't panic. Any book that I mention in this video will be read in the near future. I just wanted to give you a heads up in case you were looking forward to any of the books I mentioned in this first half and you were expecting me to read it. I will eventually, just maybe not for this video. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the vlog. Happy May 1st. I am so incredibly excited to be starting this vlog because this is the first time I am participating in a readathon. Apologies if I sound a little congested. We're overcoming a cold. I am on team thrill seekers because that totally fit who I am and just my general vibe. I'm not the best at explaining what this readathon is because I'll be totally honest, I didn't quite understand it until last night at midnight at work when I was rereading all of just the rules and everything, so it's still pretty new. I just know that I need to read books. I need to read books that I want to read that will fulfill prompts for us to escape this readathon, and whatever team escapes the readathon the fastest wins. That's all I know right now since I'm still pretty new at trying to figure out what the hell a readathon is and what all I need to do. The first few books that I want to read to fulfill these prompts are these three books. So I want to start the readathon off by reading Malice by John Gwynne. It's a chunky boy, but I've also been wanting to read this book for a while. I've heard really great things about it. A lot of people say that it reminds them of D&D or Skyrim. I have the audiobook that I got through Audible with one of the credits. I'm not going to give a synopsis of this, one, because I sound like I have a frog in my throat, and two, I already did give a brief synopsis of this story in one of my previous videos, which I'll leave linked down below. This is hopefully the first one up for the readathon. I should also just say this is subject to change. I'm very much a mood reader, and who knows, I might pick up one of these books and just not want to read it and pick something else. But for the time being, for May 1st, these are the books that I am using to fulfill these prompts. The next one is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I am very excited to read this book. I have a very pretty edition. I've had this book since it came out. I want to say it came out last year, I think, and I bought it from one of my indie bookstores. The last book I am pretty excited to read is Ballerinas by Rachel Kapolk Dale. It's been on my TBR for a very, very long time. This one's the thriller of the three books. For this readathon, you can read whatever genre you want. I think a lot of people were reading thrillers because it's kind of more like a haunted carnival is where we're at. I do have several thrillers on the list that I want to get to. It just so happens that the three books I mentioned, only one of them was a thriller. I'm not going to be starting the readathon today, unfortunately. I worked for the last 2 nights and I don't feel up to it since I'm coming down from a cold. I need to go get my cat. He has been with my parents. So that's what my May 1st is going to be looking like. But I hope you enjoy this vlog. I'm really excited to see what all happens with this readathon, and hopefully I can start with my intimidating read, or if not, I'll be reading one of these other 2 books. I have 10 minutes to talk to you guys about the books I've been reading before I have to leave and go to work. First book I want to give a little bit of an update on is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I have read about 60% of this book. I am enjoying it. I think that it is a very different type of story than what I read from V.E. Schwab in the past. So I've read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I have read the first book in the Darker Shade of Magic series. I feel like if you go into this book expecting either of those 2 stories, you're going to be a little disappointed. I feel like because I went into it knowing there's some, mixed feelings about this book, I went in with a little bit lower expectations than usual. I am enjoying it. I absolutely love V.E. Schwab's writing. I think that it is so interesting and so unique. The word choices and the sentence structure in all of her stories, but especially this one, I really enjoy. This story is very slow paced. I'm 60% in, but I would say at like the 50% mark, there wasn't a whole lot that was going on. I don't want to say I was bored because there were still certain things that were interesting, but by the 50% mark, really even the 60% mark, I had more questions than answers. That can be a little frustrating. We need to slowly answer some of those questions, and so then we can ask new questions once we get the answer to those certain questions, if that makes sense. But I feel like from the very beginning, I've been asking the same questions. And then once we got to the 50% mark, some of these questions were answered. And then at the 60% mark, I'm still asking some of those same questions that I have been originally answering, such as why was she called home? Why is her cousin, her only other family member, not telling her about what all is going on? Why not tell her about the house? Why try and keep that a secret? Like, what is the point of it being kept a secret, especially if they want her to stay away? There's some certain questions and some certain things that are happening that are a tad frustrating, but it's fine. It is a pretty quick read. Like I said, I'm 60% of the way through this book. I started it a couple of nights ago. I also read a little bit of it at work last night. I'm also following along with the audiobook. At first, I was a little interested, or it kind of caught me off guard that the narrator is a male narrator. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But as the story goes on, I feel like I'm kind of understanding why they chose a male narrator versus a female narrator. I always think about that when narrators are chosen for stories. What is the reasoning behind that? I don't know what all goes on behind the scenes with them picking a narrator for any type of story or anything like that. But because the story follows a 14-year-old girl, I was almost expecting the narrator to be a woman. It gives me certain ideas and certain clues and certain reasons. Well, why is there a male narrator narrating this story? I don't know if it means anything. I don't know if I'm looking too far into it, but that was something I wanted to just mention. I think the writing is typical V.E. Schwab. I really enjoy it. I absolutely love her writing style, and it's very creepy and it's very intriguing. There are certain parts in this story that are being pulled from her mother's journal, and that's not a spoiler because that's mentioned in the synopsis about her mother's journal, but you do get that sprinkled throughout the story, and I love that. I am starting to learn that about myself, that I love when books have different forms of media or different ways of presenting information, such as journal entries or like podcasts. This doesn't have a podcast, but you get what I'm trying to say. I love that because I feel like it keeps the balance of the story, or it kind of like breaks it up and it kind of keeps it a little more engaging. That I do love. I love the purpose of the illustrations in this story too. I absolutely love the illustrations. I think they're very beautifully done, and I love that there is a point to the illustrations in this story. They're just not, random things. It makes sense the more you read into the story as to why those illustrations are there. And this goes back to me talking about I have more questions than answers. I'm a little concerned for that because I am 60% of the way through this story, and I'm just scared that the last half of the story is just going to be massive info dumps. It's just gonna feel like it flies by, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that is the case, it is an oddly paced book. This book is very plot driven, in my opinion. I feel like the plot is more pulling the characters along, and that's not necessarily my vibe. I do love character driven stories. I do sometimes get a little bored with the characters because I don't feel like they're growing. I don't feel like we're learning a lot about these characters. They only react to the plot, if that makes sense. So it's fine, but that is something I just wanted to say, that I feel like it could be a little more character driven for my taste. I mean, the book is fine, but what I like in my stories is a little bit more character interactions and not so much here's the plot and the plot is going to drag everybody along with it. I hope the next time that we chat about this book, I will be finished and I can go ahead and give you my full thoughts, my full review on this book. But the next one I want to just quickly mention, because I need to get going to work in like 5 minutes, is Malice by John Gwynne. So I'm about 200 pages into this book, and you guys, I am loving it. Oh my gosh. The writing style, the pacing, this is just phenomenal. The characters in this story are amazing. We follow a lot of characters And there's a lot that's happening in this story. And because I'm only 200 pages into it, I don't even know how much to say or what to say, because all of these characters are just spread across the world, and there are different things that are happening in different parts of this world that are starting to be the first little seedlings of this god war that's about to return. I think that these characters are so fleshed out. They're so different. I love following all of these characters because they're all at different stages of life. They all do different things in life. We have a 14-year-old boy who is just trying to survive. He lives with his mom, his dad, and his younger sister, and he lives in a small little kind of coastal town. I love his character. The majority of what I've read so far, a lot of the chapters are his chapters, so I find that quite interesting. And then there are 4 characters that are mentioned on the back. We have Corbin, Evnis, Veridus, and Nathar, and so far all of those characters have had a chapter except for Nathar. I'm curious as to when we're gonna get a chapter from that character, considering I'm 200 pages into a 600-ish page book and he hasn't had a perspective yet. I'm interested to see how that's gonna happen, like when his chapters are finally gonna be introduced, or if they're not going to be. That's quite interesting. That's an interesting decision. In addition to these 4 characters, and only 3 of them being introduced and getting their own chapters, they've had several chapters throughout these 200 pages I've read. There's also some other characters that are not mentioned on the back that do have chapters. I mean, they probably couldn't have listed all of the characters that have a point of view. I do understand if that's the case. If there's 42 characters that are going to get chapters, they can't list 42 characters on the back here. But I'm curious as to the choices of having these characters chosen, written on the back of the book, versus being 200 pages in, and those decisions behind that. I don't know. I feel like sometimes I think too far into things and maybe it doesn't quite matter, but the writing style so far is fantastic. Characters, I absolutely love these characters. You can see the plot is slowly forming, and all of these little subplots that are happening throughout the story too, that I think are just beautifully done. Even though I'm 200 pages into it, I have been really taking my time with this book. This is one that's going to take me a while to get through, which is why I need to read other books for this readathon in between reading this book, because I truly want to understand this story and really get submerged into it and understand all of the things that are going on into this world. So there are several times where I'm pausing this when they mention certain places in this story. I'm pausing and I'm going to the map, which is a beautiful map, by the way. I wish you guys could actually see it. It's beautiful. Several times I've stopped the audiobook and I've flipped to the map just to understand where all of these people are from, where certain things are happening in the world. I'm also trying to draw my own conclusions as to why are certain things happening in certain parts of this world. I have a feeling I'm going to be addicted to this series. It's great because I already have all 4 books. I don't normally buy all of the books in a series, but I really had expectations of me loving this series, so I bought all 4 books. I don't normally do that. This is Malice so far. I think in my next update, I will have a full review for Gallant, and hopefully I can read another 200, 300 pages of Malice and give you an update on how I'm feeling, if I'm still thinking that I'm loving the story. I really don't have any doubts that I will, but you never know. Some updates for you guys. This vlog has turned a little bit into a very average reading vlog, which is weird because I feel like my reading is not typically like this, but I feel like ever since I have started to vlog my reading journey and talk more about books on my channel, a lot of the books I've been reading are quite average, which is interesting because that's not typical. Usually I have great reading months. Usually I am enjoying a lot of the books that I'm reading. So maybe it's just the books I'm picking up that are just more of average reads for me. If you hear tumbling in the background, it is my dryer. So hopefully it'll stop soon. I finished Gallant by V.E. Schwab, and I'm giving this a 3-star. It feels very middle of the road for me. I didn't love it, but I certainly didn't hate it. I wasn't bored with the story. The plot was just moving along and just dragging the characters along with it. V.E. Schwab's writing is phenomenal. I love her writing. She gets better with every single story she writes. So the writing in this is beautiful, and I think that that is what saves this story. And I was reading some of the reviews of this book on Goodreads, and I agree with a lot of the 3.5 stars, where a lot of people were saying it felt a little undercooked of a story. The idea wasn't fully formed, and I was reading the acknowledgments in the background where V.E. Schwab talks about the making and the creation of this book, where some books, some ideas, some stories just come to you and you can write them and there it is. And then other stories are a little bit slower. They come together a lot more over time. You just need a lot more patience with books. She mentions that about this book. It was something that was very slow. She had to be very patient with the idea, very patient with the plot and the characters. I can see that through this story. So I do agree that this story, I feel like, was something that took her a little bit longer to conjure. It wasn't by any means a bad book. It just wasn't necessarily for me. It felt a little bit younger. I thought it was adult, but I don't exactly know. But the main character is 14, so this might be more of a middle grade. I'll have to go back and look. And I think if I had read this when I was younger, if I suggested this to somebody who was like in their teenage years, I think they might actually really enjoy it. I think I was not the target audience for this book. Like I said, I loved the writing and I loved the atmosphere of the story and the tone, and there were some very creepy parts to this story. And I really love how V.E. Schwab talks about death pretty much in all of the books that I have read from her. I do love her approach of talking about death and darker elements into stories. That much I liked about the story. I felt a little confused by some of the things that would happen. Some of the things I felt were a little too convenient, and without trying to spoil anything for anybody, I was not connected to any of the characters, which is weird for me because when I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I was so connected to Addie. I loved her character. I loved the love interest. I actually can't even remember his name right now. In the previous books that I've read by V.E. Schwab, which was Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and A Darker Shade of Magic, I was so invested in those characters. I still think about those characters to this day and how they made me feel. A lot of the times when I'm writing my own stories or thinking about my own characters, I think about characters in books that I love, and those characters in Addie LaRue and Darker Shade of Magic, those characters pop up into my mind about, well, what did I like about them? Why did I like them? How were they so complex? And how can I make a character that's complex like these characters? My point being is, with this story, I didn't feel connected, invested in any of the characters. I think my two favorite characters were Edgar and Hannah, and these were two groundskeepers of Gallant. I really liked their little relationship. I thought that they were really fun and really cute little characters. But other than that, our main character, Olivia Pryor, and her cousin that we later meet, he's mentioned in the synopsis. I did not feel connected to either one of them, and the development of their relationship together felt very rushed. It was almost like in one chapter, or like the first half of the book when they were introduced to each other, there was hatred. They did not like each other, they didn't get along. Then like 2 chapters later, they were getting along. And it was just a weird progression, or I guess not really progression, but it was a weird switch from them not really liking each other and how her cousin was treating her, to then him being like, you're a Pryor, yes, you're one of us. But it was almost like she didn't really prove herself, or she didn't really do anything, and their relationship didn't really bloom. It was more of just like a firework where it was like nothing, and then boom, there was a friendship, and then it was gone. It was just middle of the road for me. I did enjoy the narrator though. I thought he did a very good job. I gave an update earlier where I talked about I found it was interesting about the narrator, and I don't think my suspicions really kind of came through with that. I don't think that really mattered. Maybe he was just the only person that they liked, or the person that they chose to tell the story. And I also want to add that the illustrations in this book, I thought that this was like a not necessarily a special edition, but a copy that had the illustrations in it. It turns out that the illustrations were supposed to be in the book. I don't have any type of special edition or anything. I just have the edition of the book. I convinced my mom to end up reading this book, so she has the audiobook for it, but I told her she would want the physical copy for the illustrations in the book. And I think there are some things that happen in this book where there's writing in a journal, but some of it is scraped out. And when you're listening to the audiobook, he'll say a line or two, and then there's the sound of a pencil scraping. I feel like if you weren't following along in this book, you wouldn't understand what the scraping noise was. I think it would be best to sit down and read this book. I'm gonna be giving this one to my mom. That's the first update of this little update. I ended up switching books. This is the thing with me, and this is why I've been nervous about making reading vlogs and talking about books, is because I'm such a mood reader that I will change books. I will do it just because I'm wanting to read something, or I'm not wanting to read something, or whatever the reason is. I looked at Libby to see what other books I am going to have to return the audiobooks back, and the two books that are due soon are A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin and Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. I was so excited to get back into reading Looking Glass Sound, so that was the one that I chose to read next after I finished Gallant. And now the update for that. I am 35% of the way through the ebook and the audiobook, and I'm DNFing it. I am bored. It wasn't what I was expecting. I am bored to tears. I don't really care for the writing style. The narrator for the audiobook he's fine. It's just slow. It's too slow for what I want. The book is not super long. It's, I think, 13 hours for an audiobook, so it's relatively short. But by golly, do I feel like I have struggled to get to 35% of this audiobook and the ebook, and I just don't want to read it anymore. I sat here on the couch this morning to read for 2 hours of Looking Glass Sound, and I fell asleep. And usually when I fall asleep trying to read a book, that is an indication to me that I just need to DNF a book. I am DNFing Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward, which is not a good thing since I had 2 of her books on my TBR for May. I read through some of the reviews for Looking Glass Sound. Some of the like 2 and 3 star reads or reviews are how I'm feeling about this book, which mostly it was like the writing style, and I wasn't really connecting to any of the characters, and some people who said that they powered through the story, the secrets that lead up to the ending, it all gets revealed at the end. I just don't have it in me to keep reading. I don't have it in me to care to know. I'm just bored. That's it, is really, I'm just bored and I want to read something else. So that's what I'm gonna do. We are putting we're probably gonna delete Looking Glass Sound off of my ebook, and I'll return the audiobook to Libby shortly. Up next, I am going to attempt to read A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin. I tried to read this book back in March. I ended up DNFing it softly. Looking Glass Sound is a hard DNF. I don't see myself returning to that story. But this one was a soft DNF. I knew that it had potential, and I had potential of liking this story. I just wasn't in a good spot when I was trying to attempt this story the first time. So I'm gonna try to read this one for this vlog, and then I am still reading Malice by John Gwynne. That's just a long book. I don't know if I'll get to finish it for this vlog, but that read is going great. I'm about 200 pages in. I don't have any more updates on Malice for you guys since I haven't read too much more of that story, and it's just a chunky book. I am still loving that one. I hope to enjoy the next book or 2 that I have up to read. I sat down to film a different video, and then I remembered I had some mail that I wanted to open in this video. This is the first readathon I have ever participated in. The booktuber who was organizing everything had a bonfire with some fun little merch and little items that you could purchase, and I'm a sweatshirt girly, so I wanted to support the readathon and I bought a sweatshirt. Here it is. It ended up coming in last week, but our package locker, like where we live, we're always having issues with it, so I never got the notification that it had been sitting down there for a week, and thank God I have some honest neighbors and it was still here a week later. It's here. We're gonna open it together. I want to say it was sand colored, I think. Oh, it just got really Sprite over here. Hello, son. Hang on 1 second. And I think I got an extra large because I wanted it to be slightly big, but it says the Black Cat Carnival, and on the back it has a Ferris wheel, which is so funny because that is the Thrill Seekers. Our little thing is the Ferris wheel. I'm really excited. I am probably going to be wearing this for the rest of this vlog as well as some of my other videos within the next month or so. Okay, so I am here to give the final update for my first ever vlog that is specific to a readathon. I completed A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin. I will not be surprised if this book ends up being on my most disappointing books of 2024. So I was so excited to read this book and to get into it. If you have been kind of following my reading journey this year, this was a book I actually DNF'd in March. It was a soft DNF and I wasn't in the right headspace when I was trying to get into this book. It was a weird writing style and I couldn't concentrate, and bless you. And I chalked it up to really it being my fault that I couldn't get into the story. And I do think that the first time I started reading this story, I was the problem, but I wanted to give this book another shot. And I did complete it. It's not too long. I think it's a little more than 350 pages. I didn't like this. I will just look you square in the face and say I did not like this book. I am giving it 2 stars. So it follows 6 wizards that attend this university called Balmeric University. These characters all come from different backgrounds. This society is broken up into a poor side of society and more of a richer side of society. Our 6 characters, some are from the lower half, the poorer side, and then the other characters are from the rich side. And the dynamic between the characters for me is a little odd, only because I feel like we could have done something along the lines of like Lord of the Flies type thing, and we didn't do that. This book follows those 6 characters. They all go to, it's called the Waxway Portal, which is pretty much like their subway transportation or like a train station. That's the best way I can think to describe it. What they do is they sit in this room, and it's a relatively large room, and it has candles. You sit, you think about your destination, and then when the candle burns down at the last moment, it will portal you to whatever your destination is. Our 6 characters are in this Waxway portal. It gets a little chaotic. They start bickering, they start arguing. Somebody casts a spell, maybe somebody else casts a spell as the candle is burning down. It's very chaotic, it's not calm, and these people aren't thinking about their destination. And when the candle burns down, they are portaled out into the wilderness, way outside of society. This story is their journey back to civilization. When the characters finally come to, when they're out in the wilderness, one of them is dead. There are 5 of them remaining. I think this author had really interesting ideas and interesting concepts, but I felt like that was all it was. We just had a bunch of really random, interesting ideas that didn't really connect through the story. It felt very flawed. I felt like I was reading a rough draft. This needed a lot of work before it was published. This magic system was very flawed and not very well explained, and it almost felt like to me that the author didn't quite understand the magic system himself and would just throw out really fancy words and scientific things to throw you off and to make it sound intelligent, if that makes sense. I feel like the best way to really describe this book and the magic system and the world is to just say it felt half-baked. It did not feel like it went through enough rounds of edits for it to have made sense, and there were quite a few things that I feel like were plot holes in this story. While I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, I won't talk about the specific things that I felt like were the plot holes, but on page 270-ish, kind of around there was a crater-sized plot hole. I couldn't believe more people didn't talk about this in their reviews. We had less than 100 pages of this book, and we were introduced to some other type of magic that had been hinted at, but not hinted that this particular type of magic was in this world. It just got pulled out of left field. Like I said, it was a crater-sized hole. If you had flown up into space, looked down at Earth, and you saw a crater, that was the plot hole in this book. That's how big that crater was, that plot hole in this story. The way that the author handled this plot hole, I did not like it. It felt very lazy. It felt very much like I'm the author and this is what I'm telling you is wrong with this and why this plot hole happened, and it was duct taped there and like fixed with 2 sentences. I had a huge issue with that because this plot hole that was in the story, we wouldn't even have had the story if this plot hole wasn't there. And it almost felt like as the author was typing out and drafting the story, he was discovering that he just wrote a plot hole, and then those 2 sentences that he fixed the plot hole with, like that duct tape, he immediately countered whatever mess he had created. I felt very disappointed in this book. I feel like I could really go on and on talking about my issues with this book, but I will also say I mentioned that the magic system did seem interesting and cool, but that's all it really was. It was just an interesting concept, interesting ideas, but not very well executed, unfortunately. I do enjoy books that have society separated. So in this story, we had the poorer side of town and then the more rich, the founding families of the magic in the world. That I liked. I love how the government also controlled this magic. So it wasn't like the magic was just out in the world willy-nilly. Anybody could have this magic. If you needed to recharge your magical vessel, which I'll get to in just a second, you had to go to this warehouse and almost purchase the magic. Depending on where your status was in society, that determined how much magic the government allowed you to have. So the government controlled it. They would recharge your vessel themselves. So it wasn't like they would hand you magic and then you charge your own vessel. You would hand over the vessel and then they would charge it for you. What I liked about this story is it wasn't necessarily like they used wands or staffs or a certain thing, like a certain object, to house and to store their magic. They could have their own individual vessel. I think our main character, her vessel was like a horseshoe type looking thing. I believe that her mother's vessel was a bracelet. Whatever object you chose to enchant, I believe that's how I understood it, was what you could use to be the vessel that stored your magic. I thought that that was really cool and how it was kind of original to each individual character. The writing style in this was very, very young. There were a lot of really odd sentences. Things happened in this story that were weird. I wouldn't consider any of these things that I'm going to mention spoilers, but in case you don't want to listen, with this little door emoji on the screen, I will be talking about little bits and pieces that could potentially be spoilers. I don't think that they're spoilers, but they might be considered spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, just go ahead and move a little bit forward until you don't see the door on the screen for possible spoilers. Towards the end half of this book, there was a little bit of a battle that was going on. But there was a bird that was in this story too. This big giant bird, it was almost like an eagle, came swooping down, attacked one of the enemy people, but what the bird attacked was this man's exposed earlobe. According to the text, it said this bird's name was Vega. I think it said something along the lines of Vega swooped down and grabbed hold of this man's exposed earlobe. The whole thing was just odd to me because I'm like, one, aren't earlobes always exposed? Unless we've all been doing it wrong. Number 2, if this enemy person was attacking a friend of mine and I was a bird with talons, I don't know if I would exactly go for an earlobe. I would probably go for a shoulder or a side or the stomach or a leg, you know, something I can really like drive my talons into. So it was just weird that this big old bird with these giant talons goes near boink and like pulls the earlobe. That was just a little strange for me. Interesting choices in the writing style. I don't want to continue this on for too long. This was the second book that I have completed for the month. I have read a little bit more of Malice by John Gwynne. That's just a very chunky book, and that book is just going to take a lot longer to read. That is probably going to be a month-long book. But to recap this entire video, I have read 2 books. I read Gallant by V.E. Schwab, and I read A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin. I am still reading Malice by John Gwynne, and I ended up DNFing Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. Those are the 4 books that I attempted to read or did read and are still reading in the month of May, but that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would absolutely love to have you here following me on my writing and reading journey. But thank you all so much for watching this video. My name is Autumn, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.